This is a story about my girlfriend working at one of the hospitals in St. Paul. I'll tell it from her perspective. One day, when I was working, I really needed to use the bathroom, but I didn't want to because the bathrooms were next to the morgue. My stomach was hurting so bad. I finally decided to just screw it and head on to the bathroom. When I entered into the room, I was the only one in the bathroom. At the time, I didn't see anyone around working on the same floor as me. As I was minding my own business in the stall, someone entered into the bathroom. They walked into the stall directly next to me. But here's the weird thing. They didn't use the bathroom or close the neighboring stall door next to me. They just turned their feet towards me and stood there. The person was wearing a black dress. They had the dress that went down to their ankles, and they were wearing black boots. This was strange because only people who work here can be on the hospital floor that I was on. And obviously, everyone has to wear hospital scrubs. I thought it was some pervert looking at me from on top of the stall. I looked up and I saw nothing. The thing was just standing with their feet facing me. I got goosebumps and I was terrified out of my mind. I texted my boyfriend that I was scared, but he didn't see my text yet. About 4 minutes go by and it felt like an hour. I said, screw it, I'm leaving this place. I quickly used the bathroom and left that bathroom as fast as possible. Now, as I remember, when I was grabbing my belongings in the stall, the thing was still standing there. It never moved, never made a sound. I didn't care to look to see who was in the stall because I was too scared. I'll never use that bathroom ever again. Ugh, that was a scary ass story, man. It was like any other Saturday night. I dragged myself out of bed and managed to throw on my scrubs and make myself look human. I recently started a new job at the hospital and had no seniority, so I had the crappy overnight shift. Aside from the messed up sleep cycle, it wasn't too bad, although Saturday nights were a lot quieter, therefore creepier. I drove into work, clocked in, and started my rounds. The hallways were pretty much empty. I stopped by each assigned room and peeked in. All was as it should be. I headed back towards the nurse's station, and as I did, I heard what sounded like a low moan. I stopped dead in my tracks. Did I really hear something, or is my mind playing tricks on me? It was so quiet, I swore I could hear my heartbeat. I shook it off and kept on walking. Then, I heard it again, this time louder. It was unmistakable. The sound was coming from the room a few doors down. I just literally checked so I knew everybody was asleep. It would be wrong if I had just took off running in the opposite direction, scared for my life. So, I did what I had to. I turned around and walked back to room 12. I knocked lightly on the door and slowly peeked in. I stepped in slowly and inched closer to the patient. The room was dark and I could barely see. Suddenly, I heard another moaning sound. My heart stopped. Then, I heard a low sobbing. It was a patient. "It hurts," she mumbled. I breathed a sigh of relief. It was not uncommon to hear a patient's moan in pain. What's wrong with me? I should have known this. After a round of medication, the patient settled down and I went back on my tasks. I had to restock the supply room and hated doing so, partly because I had to go all the way down the hall and around the corner to grab what I needed. No use getting out of it, so I grabbed my list and headed down the hall. I rounded the corner and rushed into the room to grab my stuff. I ran out of there quickly and started to head back towards safety. Silly me, I know. Right before I rounded the corner leading to my station, I caught a glimpse of something moving in the opposite direction. Was I being silly again and letting my mind trick me into being a fool? I turned around, and down the hall was an older lady walking around in her hospital gown. I parked my supply cart to the side and started walking towards the lady. Sometimes we have patients get up in the middle of the night and wander around. My job was to keep everyone safe. Although it was my coworker's section, I figured that he was busy doing other things, so I'll help this lady get back to bed. She looked confused, pacing back and forth like she was waiting for someone. "Hello?" I said as loud yet as quiet as I could. She stopped and turned around to look at me. It was a little old Hmong lady. She looked so frail and weak. I wondered how she even got herself out of bed. I knew she didn't speak English, and I didn't want to confuse her any more than she already was, so I spoke in Hmong. "Hello, Auntie. Can I help you with anything?" She stared at me and didn't say anything. Poor thing must have been so disoriented and more confused than ever. "Do you need any help?" She started to walk up to me. "You're Hmong," she said. I nodded and again asked if I could be of any assistance. She looked around and said, "I'm so cold." Aha! She must have been freezing and woke up to find help. "Oh, I'll help you find your room. Where's your room?" She started to shake, and I saw what looked like fear in her eyes. She searched her surroundings with frantic eyes and responded, "Earlier today, I was upstairs in my room, and it was warm. Then later they moved me downstairs, and I can't sleep because it's too cold." I knew exactly what was happening. She must have been transferred from the unit upstairs. I'd always thought that the higher floors were warmer. It gets colder as you head down the floors. I felt bad for her. It was kind of cold down here. "I'll take you to your room and get you an extra blanket," I said. I reached out to place a hand on her back as if to encourage her to lead me to her room. She was ice cold. Her back was exposed and she looked as pale as the walls. The old lady wouldn't budge. "Let's go to your room and I'll help you get warmed up," I said. The lady started to breathe really fast. I won't go back into that room. It's smaller and it's too cold," she said. Please don't put me back in that small cold room. It feels like a freezer, and I'm scared." At this point, I thought about paging the nurse, but decided against it because she wouldn't be able to speak Hmong anyway, and this would upset the patient. I tried to convince her to lead me back to her room. I guess I could have ran back to the desk to find out who she was and where her room was, but I didn't want her to wander off. "Can you take me back upstairs to my old room? They moved me and my family doesn't know where to find me. They'll be coming here to see me and I won't be there." I couldn't just take her to a different unit. She was here for a reason, so I lied. "We already contacted your family. They know where your new room is. They'll come there in the morning." She seemed to have bought it. "Do they know that I'm cold?" she asked. "They know it gets cold and they've asked me to help you. They've asked me to get you an extra blanket to keep you warm for the night." This little lady was making this harder than it should be, but it's nothing that I wasn't used to. "Will they come and dress me? Will they bring me clothes? All I have is a white sheet. It's too thin and I'm cold." I know we kept heated blankets by my station. I knew the only way to get this old lady back to bed was to prove to her that I'd fix her problem. "Auntie, if you agree to go back to your room, I'll get you a warm blanket, and I'll be sure your family knows where your room is when they come." She looked at me and smiled softly. "Okay, as long as they know and as long as I'm not cold." Yes, it worked. I convinced her to cooperate. I told her to wait there and that I'd be right back with a blanket. I ran down the hall, grabbed my cart, and headed back to the station. I grabbed a heated blanket and started to head back down the hall when my coworker Larry popped out from one of the rooms. "Hey, where were you?" he asked. "Down the hall. One of your patients is out of bed, and she's cold. I was just going to run down there with a blanket to help her get back to her room," I said. He looked at me and asked, "What lady?" "I just did all my rounds and everyone is sound asleep." Of course, I didn't know what the room was, so I said, "The little Hmong lady. I don't think she knows her room number, so I didn't ask. She must be a transfer because I haven't seen her around." Larry had this confused look on his face. He took out his assignment sheet and skimmed through it. Are you sure she was Hmong? I don't have any Hmong people on my sheet." I told him I was pretty darn sure that she was Hmong. He thought and thought again, and even checked his sheet one more time. "Nope, no Hmong lady, no Hmong patients at all." He showed me his sheet. I took mine out too and looked it over. None for me as well. I peered down the long hallway to the opposite end and saw that she was no longer there. The two of us ran down and peeked around the corner. No one. The only Hmong patient we've had was this little lady, but she was only here for 2 days. She passed away on first shift and they took her down to the morgue, Larry explained. I had goosebumps all over, and I could feel the hairs on my head stand up. My heart was racing so fast, I thought I'd keel over and pass out. "You okay? You looked like you had just saw a ghost." In my mind, I'm thinking that perhaps I did. However, my sanity was at stake here, so I played it off. "Nah, I'm alright. Maybe I'm thinking of another night. Lack of sleep, you know how it goes." He laughed, and I forced a chuckle. "You probably should be at work. Sleep deprivation will have you seeing things." I completed the rest of my shift, and by the time the morning shift came in, I was glad to be done. I didn't even remember the drive home. I didn't remember driving or even getting out of my car and into my bed. That morning, I had a dream that still haunts me to this day. I dreamt of that little old Hmong lady. She came to me dressed in her Hmong funeral attire. Her flesh wasn't rotting or anything gruesome like that. If not for the funeral attire and the bluish tint, I'd say that she looked lively. In my dream, she stood next to my bed and shook me to wake up. I opened my eyes and she had a grin on her face, an unusual grin that seemed to spread from ear to ear. She doubled in size from the layers of attire she wore. I tried to scream, but I was paralyzed. From fear? I don't know. I just felt like I was being held in place against my will. You never brought me a blanket. I was cold. I was very cold all night in that freezer. I wanted to yell that I'm sorry and to tell her that I tried to give her a blanket, but she was gone. I wanted to beg her for forgiveness. I wanted to cry, but no matter how hard I tried, I could not make a single sound. "Do you like my clothes? My family brought me these clothes. I'm not so cold anymore." She squealed and started to laugh. The old lady leaned closer to my face, and I smelled it. Rotting flesh. It smelled like meat that's been left out for too long. The closer she leaned in, the more pressure I felt on my chest. I couldn't scream or move, but hell did I ever try. I started to cry and prayed in my head. I prayed that I would wake up from this nightmare. She kept on getting closer and closer, and the smell got stronger and stronger. I couldn't move my body at all, but I managed to shut my eyes. Inside, I was screaming so loud I would have woken up the dead if the sound had managed to escape my lungs. It felt like an eternity, and I felt myself running out of breath. but I finally felt the weight lifted, and I woke up in the afternoon sun breaking in through the cracks in the blinds. I was covered in sweat, and my chest was sore. It felt like a sumo wrestler had sat on me. I called in sick later that evening and spent the next day recovering from my ordeal. A week went by without incident. I seemed to have forgotten about the unsettling events that had occurred the previous week. I woke up the following Saturday afternoon and came upstairs to find my little brother sprawled out on the couch. "Where's Mom and Dad?" I asked. Without ever looking up from his cartoon, he replied, "At the funeral." I don't know why I asked, but I did. "Who died?" Again, without straying from the TV screen, he replied, some old Hmong lady. How should I know?" I don't know why, but all those feelings came back. The paralyzing fear, the millions of racing thoughts. I found out later from my parents that it was an older lady who died at the very hospital I worked at just the week before. I never did tell them about what happened. I never bothered to find out if it was the same lady that haunted me. I like to believe that it's coincidence, but you know what they say, seeing is believing. Interested in sharing your stories? Submit them to HmongChronicles@gmail.com or in the description below. Here is the next story. Thank you. My father had become severely ill during his visit out of state going to see family. We all came to visit him at the hospital where he later passed away. My sisters and I were staying at my niece's apartment where they stayed on the second floor. The night my father passed away, I couldn't sleep. I shared a room with my niece that night. My niece's bed was next to a window, and I slept next to her bed on the floor. It was around 3 a.m., and I could hear loud meowing. For some reason, I looked out the window, which was only covered by those white see-through-ish curtains, when I could see a shadow of a huge cat walking next to the window. It kept meowing and then sat right in front of the window. It fell off and started screaming as if it was fighting another cat. I turned my back to the window, plugged my ears, and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I told my nieces what happened, and they didn't believe me. My niece, who I slept next to, also didn't hear anything. She reminded me that we were on the second floor and that their window has no ledge for anything to stand or walk on. When she told me that, I was spooked. Chills went down my spine. I even looked outside the same window to prove what I saw, but there really was nothing that it could walk or sit on, just a bare wall. That night, when we drove back home, we ran over a black cat. From the car side mirrors, you could definitely see a smushed body. However, for some reason, when we made a U-turn to check on the cat, it was gone. Nothing had happened since, and I'm happy that nothing has happened either. I still think about that night my father passed away, and I can still remember the sounds of the cat screaming. Back in Laos, during the war, a couple had just gotten married right before the husband was drafted. About a month had passed by, and one day, while the wife was in the house cooking, she was facing the entrance when she thought she saw a quick glance of her husband quickly walking outside. She ran out to see who it was, but there was nobody in sight. Just as she turned around to head back inside, she saw her husband walk into the house, this time very clearly. She thought that maybe he's back from the army, so she was so happy and excited. But to her fortune, no one was in the house. She called out his name, looked everywhere in the house because she swore she saw him enter. Then she walked back to the fireplace. When she saw her husband leaving the house again, so this time she rushed out very fast and followed. But to her surprise, he was nowhere to be found. The very next day, she went to the village shaman and found out that her husband had passed away in battle. He came back to bring his stuff with him to the next life and to say goodbye to her one last time.